fact, right when Christ was born. So this has been going on for a long time. But these hyperinflations usually last 2 to 7 years, and they come to an end. And the end creates great opportunity, huge opportunity for the people who have their head above water. That's the whole point. And most people don't. It's a very discouraging thing. If you're sitting in Rhodesia today, it would be unbelievably discouraging for 99% of the people there. You'd have no money, no food, and you wouldn't know what your future might be. But life will go on.
Yeah, and it seems to make sense that really what you're talking about is a redistribution of wealth, not by government edict, not by socialist mandate, but the market just leveling the playing field. And there's those who have stepped out of the way and those who are still in the way of an oncoming train.
Well, and see, again, David, you and I talked about it. To me, that's the most fun and where we are really sometimes misinterpreted in what we're talking about today, because the things that a prudent person might do today, if they had any thought that hyperinflation or high inflation might come to America, would be fairly reasonable, and even if you were wrong, would turn out to be pretty fine investments anyway. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense to me, Jim. It seems that there's an emotional wrestling match that goes on. And the emotional wrestling match is that throwing in the towel on the U.S. dollar could somehow be construed as unpatriotic. Throwing in the towel on sort of our pull yourself up by your bootstraps individualism and our ability to overcome any particular challenge as a country, which we have done in the past, is again somehow a jibe or a stab in the back of who we are as a people. It's like we're losing touch with an identity, or there's something that we're afraid of in the embrace of change, when the reality, Jim, is exactly what you're saying. We're talking about a very temporary, a very short period of time where you have to be flexible, you have to be nimble, but we come back around. As Ambrose Evans Pritchard said just a few weeks ago on our program, you guys were the first in, you'll be the first out. Mm-hmm. You're the first into these problems. Hopefully you're the first out and can offer some leadership.
Well, see, in my lifetime, I think of World War as being the worst thing I can envision. I was young, very young, when World War II was going on. And then, of course, we've seen wars since. But I was thinking this morning about it, and I thought, in spite of the fact that they were the focal point of evil in the war, that would be my opinion, the Germans, think what's happened up and down within their country in my lifetime. So anytime you say you're a doom and gloomer and you think the end of the world is coming, I just don't buy it at all. I think it's really remarkable how creative people are, and how even in the darkest moments, the next day they start over and do something pretty amazing.
Well, you've seen at least 2, maybe 3 industrial expansions in Germany, and you've seen 2 definite hyperinflations in Germany.
Yeah.
So just in the last 100 years, that's a great example.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then to think within 10 years after those things happened, once they had the biggest military juggernaut in the world, and the second time around after World War II, they turn into a great industrial state. Pretty amazing.
Well, it seems to me that when we don't face reality, like the Japanese and their original bad bank loans, you perpetuate a disaster and a crisis much further than it needed to go. So we have what we call Japan's lost decade. Is that what we're kind of looking at here in the United States? And we're talking about the bailout of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We're talking about raising another $58 billion this week. The Treasury is. Aren't we just kind of turning a blind eye to the issue?
I'm really disturbed, obviously, and it makes me very angry at times with what the government's doing, because our government no longer is me or is working for me in any fashion as far as I can tell. But when you really look at what they're doing, you mentioned Fannie and Freddie, which last week all of a sudden looked like the end of the world, and those stocks, which had both traded at $60 or $70 a share just a year ago, were down to $6 and $8 or $9 a piece. And something you overlooked this morning is that they both have doubled, honestly, in price in about the last 6 or 7 days. They both doubled in price from their lows of a week ago. They're both trading twice as high now. Now, see, those are the 2 stalwarts of the whole mortgage business of America, and many of the other countries in the world have invested in that. So if you ask me in a very cynical way, is that a rig job? Are they rigging that? I'd say they sure are. And would you say, how do they rig it? And I'd say, I don't even know. The day there was a crisis, everybody had dreams of monetizing that debt and the fact that they would destroy the dollar. And since then, both Paulson and Bernanke have gone undercover and haven't said a word, and the markets have recovered, and you don't have a clue as to how they're going to solve that problem, because all of a sudden it's a very secret affair. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, we've also had the issue of the SEC coming out and going after 40 or 50 different hedge funds, subpoenaing them and basically saying, if you issue any bad news on these stocks, we're coming after you.
Yeah, that's true.
you can come out with good news, but not bad news.
It's a very regulated and a very, very propagandized market, and that's just what we have to live with. And I think that's where you really have to have some encouragement about the goodness of man and the fact that amazingly in this world it's gone on and on and on in spite of all these things happening. I'm sure the Romans were looking at the same thing, and I'm sure the English have gone through a couple times the same cycle. I talked to a Frenchman last week at lunch, and it was amazing to me what was going on in France, in the most socialistic country in the world, and people are still alive and doing things. So, I think it's bad to get too far down on the doom and gloom thing. What you guys do for a living and what you do in your discussion as far as talking about what are the alternatives and how do you get through difficult times just makes a lot of sense.
Well, if we do go through a period of crisis, and it's finite in time, 2 years to 7 years is the average hyperinflation and in the duration of the acute pain, what kind of a predisposition, what kind of a mindset do we need to adjust ourselves to? What is a mode of thinking that works in that context?
I don't think it's any different than me driving into Denver today, and that is that if I drive in at 8 o'clock, I'm going to be in the middle of the biggest traffic jam you ever saw, and if I wait till 8:30 or 9, I won't have any traffic problem at all. I guess that's the answer to what you just said. I think there are certainly investment media which are proven time-wise over and over again. You can read about every hyperinflation in the world. I was reading about Genghis Khan last night, and you can read about any of them, and they went back either to copper money or silver money over in China. They trusted the silver and the copper money. They didn't trust the paper. So, the answers are too simple, to be honest with you, and therefore, am I explaining this correctly? I mean, to me, you just start out with a silver and a gold coin and say, if you don't have one of those today, you're really kind of dumb, because that would give you a safety valve, or that gives you your life raft during 2 or 3 or 4 years when things might be pretty difficult, and that would keep you and your family afloat. Well, what else can I say?
But with a PhD in economics from Princeton or Harvard or Yale, I've got to have an econometric model that makes it a little bit more complex. Are you saying that it's basically common sense and it boils down to a historical perspective?
I do. I was a stockbroker for many, many years, as you know. I started at Dean Witter in 1968, and the blessing I had in my life was that I understood psychology perhaps better than I did numbers, and I graduated in engineering, so I actually knew numbers pretty good. But if you said, what did you learn after it's all over, I'd say you're anticipating the psychology of man. It's so easy and so scary, and it isn't very hard, because when it gets dark, we all think we're going to get sleepy, and when the sun comes up, we all think we're going to get up and go to work. And I think man over and over comes up psychologically with about the same responses to whatever is happening, and therefore what you just said, I think the answers are quite easy, or would seem to be.
Once again, you're listening to the McAlvany Weekly Commentary. I'm Kevin Orrick, along with David McAlvany. Today joining us is Jim Deeds. I just wanted to mention, David, coming up here on August 7th in Overland Park, Kansas, you and your dad, Don McAlvany, are inviting listeners and our readers to come join you at Thursday, August 7th at 6:30 p.m. at the Overland Park, Kansas Doubletree Hotel. You guys will be talking about the banking crisis, global inflation, some of the strategies and steps to take on things that we're talking about right now. Jim, let me ask you, in fact, bringing up strategies and steps to take, you had mentioned the gold coins. What are some other things that people can be doing in preparation for a hyperinflationary or just a high inflationary period? What are some of the creative things that they could be doing right now other than the precious metals?
Well, I focused on precious metals because that's the highest level of liquidity, and before we leave it, I would mention something that may be overlooked by a lot of people because they speak about gold, or they may even talk about platinum. So I would give a quick rundown in a minute and a half on that. Gold seems always like the answer, but the truth is, in a barter society or in a barter situation for 2 to 7 years, silver coins would be much, much more important day to day in your living than the gold coins would be. The gold would be so high priced that it wouldn't fit into anything you were doing on a day-to-day basis. So if anyone's overlooking silver and silver coins, silver eagles or junk silver, it just seems to me that that's a must. We've mentioned before food. Now, if you read anything, you know that food prices are going up all over the world. The price of rice has tripled in the last year. It's come back a little bit from 25 back to about 17 right now, but it started out at 6 or 7, so it tells you what's going on. Food, and something that we, of course, have talked before down at Don McAlvany's, is that food reserves, whether you're just setting aside some oatmeal for a rainy day, or whether you actually have the funds available to set aside, if you're an older person, set aside some freeze-dry food. It sure makes sense to me, and I've done that. So,